And we are live. I want to thank our live viewers. This is going to be the interview portion of the Polite Society podcast, episode 283. We're going to be interviewing Grant Cunningham about revolvers as a primary defense gun. We'll be getting going here in just a second. Okay, and everything's set on my end. Everybody else ready to go?
I'm ready. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I got you. I got you good. All right. What I'm gonna let's go ahead and John, since you set this up, you wanna tackle the introduction and starting everything off.
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll say welcome back to the interview segment of Polite Society podcast. Do a brief bio of you and welcome you, and then we'll just be throwing questions at you.
Cool.
So.
All right. Just a second here. And we're rolling. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
In 5. Welcome back to the interview segment of the Polite Society podcast. We have as our guest tonight Grant Cunningham. Grant is a revolver smith, a personal defense trainer, a blogger, a podcaster, and a published author. His books include the Gun Digest book of the Revolver, Defensive Revolver Fundamentals, and Defensive Pistol Fundamentals, which will be released later this month. In addition to his books, Grant's articles on shooting and self-defense have been published in a number of popular magazines and on websites like the Personal Defense Network. Grant has made a DVD on revolver shooting for the NRA's Personal Firearms Defense Series and is a founding member of the Association of Defensive Shooting Instructors. In past shows, we've had discussions about the use of revolver for defensive gun use. So we would like to go to an expert and welcome Grant.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Well, I guess the very first thing I would say is that there are some that consider the revolver as being outdated. Its limited capacity is just hurts its ability to be used as a defense weapon. How do you respond to critics who say the revolver is not a viable weapon for a person's primary carry firearm?
Well, you know, we see a lot of people defending themselves still to this day with revolvers. In fact, if you look at the Armed Citizens column in American Rifleman, or you look at a lot of news reports about self-defense shooting, you find still a lot of people out there successfully defending themselves with a revolver. So that alone makes it a viable self-defense tool still. A lot of people still use it. Does it have limitations? Oh, yes. There are significant limitations with the revolver, and anybody who's picking one as a primary defensive tool has to understand what those limitations are and how to train and work around those limitations. Now, even for myself, I don't carry a revolver 100% of the time. There are times when I put on a modern polymer striker-fired 9mm pistol and carry that. But I understand that the times when that is advantageous and the times when the revolver's advantages work to my favor. And so I'll carry them both depending upon the situation. For a lot of people, still the revolver does make a good self-defense weapon, as we see in the news.
What are the advantages to using a revolver?
Well, there are several. First of all, of course, is that the manual of arms is relatively simple. A lot of people like the ease of loading and unloading and that sort of thing. So the manual of arms is very, very simple. The interface is simple. It is a point and pull the trigger interface, very similar to the Glock. In fact, I tell people that realistically the Glock has more in common with a double-action revolver than it does with, say, a 1911 auto pistol. Even though they're both auto pistols, they both use magazines, yada, 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 down the way. In terms of conceptual operation, the Glock is very much a revolver with a magazine in it, because you have no extraneous safeties, no extraneous controls that you have to manipulate between the time you decide that you need to fire the gun and the time that the bullet exits the muzzle. So very simple manual of arms in terms of handling, very simple operation. Of course, a lot of people will tell you the revolver is more reliable in the sense that it has a longer mean time between failure. That's true. They will tolerate neglect far more than an autoloader will. It's been my experience that they won't tolerate abuse quite as well as an autoloader will. But in terms of neglect, for that gun that somebody is going to leave in a drawer and forget about for a couple of years, they still function just fine. They function generally when they've got a lot of dust bunnies and that kind of thing on them. So in terms of sheer reliability, in terms of still operating when they've been neglected, the revolver wins. Mean time between failures, as I said, is quite long. Of course, they've got a very wide variety of ammunition available for them. With the autoloader, you have to stay within relatively narrow certain parameters in terms of bullet weight and the amount of power and the bullet shape and all that sort of thing. The revolver is generally a lot more tolerant, not just of ammunition choices, but sometimes in terms of bad ammunition as well. They'll tolerate certain ammunition anomalies that an autoloader will. As for some people, a quality revolver is still less expensive than a quality autoloader. For some people, that's a really important distinction. There are a lot of people for whom that $600 autoloader, it just isn't going to do it, where the $350 revolver fits into their budget so that they can get an effective quality self-defense tool. And we're talking level of quality versus level of quality. Of course, you can certainly get a very, very low-end autoloader just as you can a low-end revolver. I wouldn't recommend either one of those things, but if budget is a concern and you still want a quality firearm, the revolver still has some advantages there. The revolver fits various hand sizes a little better than most autoloaders do. You can get much larger grips if you've got big hands. You can get much smaller grips if you've got small hands. Although a lot of the autoloaders today are getting close to that with their interchangeable back straps, the revolver still wins that game. It still has a great deal of fitability to it that the autoloader just doesn't. And finally, for people who are concealed carrying, the revolver, and this is something that a lot of people really don't get, so I have to be very careful when I explain this, the revolver is actually easier to hide in a lot of cases than an autoloader will. And I tell people, listen, if you've got kids, they've got toys, put on a dress shirt, with a pocket, with a breast pocket there, go down to your kid's toy box, pick up a couple of Legos, stick them in the pocket, and look in the mirror. And notice how it really shows up. Now, go back to the toy box, throw those Legos back in there, and get a couple of marbles, stick them in the same pocket. And you notice they don't show up as much because those nice rounded contours tend to blend in, and they tend to not stick out with fabric. So sometimes, for certain applications, the revolver is sometimes actually a little easier to conceal. And there, we could go on. There's some sort of very unusual advantages to the revolver that only come into play in certain instances, but those are the biggies.
If I could jump in real quick, you touched earlier on, and this is one thing that has always, I am a semi-auto guy. More specifically, I'm a Glock guy. But one thing that has always intimidated me about revolvers, with semi-autos, basically for defensive uses, you've got 9, 40, 45. There are more calibers, a few more calibers, but those are the big three. And ballistically, with plus P hollow point ammunition, they're ballistically very close. With revolvers, you got everything from the 22 to the 44 mag. That is being, well, the 22 not so much, but you've got a wide variety of calibers that are being used for handguns that you're widely able to get ammunition for. How do you make that choice? And obviously the 44 mag and the 38 special are not even close ballistically, are they?
They're not close ballistically. Interestingly enough, I'm a big fan of the work of Greg Ellifritz, and he's done a lot of research in terms of actual effect of various calibers in actual shootings. In fact, that's where we get the information that ballistically, between 9 and 45, there just isn't a lot of difference in terms of its effect on bad guys. And we see the same thing with with 38 Special, 357, 44. In terms of their effect on bad guys, there doesn't seem to be a statistically significant difference between them. The problem, of course, with the 44s, with the big calibers like the 44 mags, is they're very difficult to control. Follow-up shots with a 44 mag are difficult for the best of us. And unlike, say, even a hot 45 is relatively easy to control compared to a 44 Magnum. For that reason, the vast majority, 99, probably in excess of 99% of the people who are picking a revolver for self-defense end up with a 38/357 revolver, because that's the sweet spot of effectiveness and controllability and concealability.
Let me go back to something you started out with. Sometimes you carry a semi-automatic, and I thought Grant Cunningham was the revolver guy. So what are those circumstances? Is it a wardrobe issue, or is it situational? Why do you switch?
Sometimes it's a wardrobe issue. There are times when the holsters that I have for the semi-auto fit better with the wardrobe that I happen to be wearing. That happens occasionally. I find myself very often during the summer carrying a revolver, particularly a J-frame revolver in short pocket, because I wear shorts during the summer. And so I very often find myself slipping a J-frame into a pocket holster and into the front pocket of a pair of shorts. And during the winter, when I've got heavier overclothes and things on, I tend to carry the autoloader a little more, because its angular projections don't tend to push through heavy garments quite as much. There are times situationally, however, when I'm going to pick the autoloader. For instance, if I know that I'm going into an area where there is an excess of gang activity, where there have been an excess of multiple perpetrator attacks, where I think I might need the extra capacity, those are the kinds of times where I'm going to pick an autoloader. There was a period of time when I was doing, and I have to be very careful about this, when I was doing security work for an institution that the FBI had identified as likely to be attacked. And we'll leave it at that. And for that kind of a job, you can bet that I had a Glock 19 and all the high-capacity magazines that I could carry underneath a suit coat. I'm not going to pick a revolver for that job. So the revolver is a tool, like any other tool. It has its strengths and weaknesses, and I pick those tools to fit the job at hand.
Sure. Capacity. Any other real weaknesses or disadvantages that come to mind?
For me personally, the biggest issue is capacity. Now, for some other people, shootability may be a big issue, because the revolver has that, really long, heavy trigger that you have to master to make shots. And if you don't put in the time and the effort to train and practice that, it's going to be very, very difficult to shoot a revolver effectively. I've done that. I can shoot a revolver very, very well, so I have no problem with that. Somebody who's new to shooting, however, who is just getting into particularly defensive shooting, and particularly if maybe they've got some muscular problems in the hands, maybe some weak digits or something, they're going to have a very, very difficult time shooting that revolver. And in fact, I won't recommend a revolver for those people, because it's just too difficult in terms of the training and in terms of the practice to get to the point where they can use it effectively. For those people, an autoloader is going to be a better choice. So the reason that I might, the issues that I might have with a revolver are different than the issues that, say, somebody new to the shooting game is going to have.
Sure. If I could jump in then again, we had a conversation earlier in the show. We were talking about a person that was not having an easy time racking the slide of a semi-auto. And we thought that maybe a revolver might be a good option for them. But then your comment there, that you just brought up there, a lot of the revolvers that are used for defensive situations do have a fairly heavy trigger pull. Is there? I guess I'm trying to think of how to phrase this correctly, which it would be, as a trainer for you, which would be easier to overcome, having somebody rack a slide or getting used to a heavier trigger pull?
Oh, that's easy. Racking the slide, without a doubt. Racking the slide is a matter of technique. There are very, very few people that I have encountered that were absolutely physically unable, even with proper technique, to rack a slide. What I found is those people, and interesting enough, those few people that I found that absolutely could not rack a slide also couldn't pull the heavy trigger on the revolver. So the two issues tend to go together. If you have not a lot of upper body strength and you're having trouble racking that slide, the chances are that you're not going to have the hand strength to pull the trigger anyway. I can teach techniques to get around the issues racking the slide. From body positioning to how the gun is grasped to, if necessary, hooking the rear sight on the edge of a table and racking it. I mean, if push comes to shove, you can do it that way too. There's nothing I can do realistically there's no technique I can come up with to make that double action trigger easier to manipulate, except for using both fingers on the trigger, which is silly and it gets into its own problems as well. So by and large, and I say this, in my books, in my revolver books, I've said that, listen, if you've got issues pulling the double action trigger, go to an autoloader. Just go to an autoloader. And in fact, I think for most people, the autoloader is probably a better default choice than the revolver is. I've in fact, I think it was in my first revolver book, I even said, ladies, if you go into a gun store and you say you want a gun for personal protection, the first thing the guy does is set that nice lightweight J-frame revolver on the counter for you, turn around and walk out, because these people are, they're not listening to you and they don't really understand what you need if that's the first thing they put out, because that's usually the most difficult gun possible to shoot. I would much rather see that person with a Glock 42, I think that's the new one, Glock 42 or a Glock 26 than I would a J-frame. So I'd much rather teach people how to rack a slide. It's much easier to do.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the advantages. What, beside capacity, and trigger pull, what are some of the disadvantages to revolvers?
Those are the two biggies: capacity and mastering that trigger, and not just in terms of, even if you're strong enough to manipulate the trigger, the technique of manipulating the double action trigger is difficult. It does take time. It does take effort to train, to learn how to put shots rapidly, rapid multiple accurate shots on target with a revolver. It takes some work. Even if you have the hand strength, it still takes technique. So the learning curve, the training curve for the revolver is much, much steeper than it is for any autoloader, save the double action autoloaders. If you've got the double action, single action autoloaders, they have the same problems that the revolver does, only doubled. So that's I think the worst thing is just the amount of effort and the amount of time that you have to put into using it efficiently and using it effectively.
I was going to say, are there revolvers, we've all heard of the stories about, here, little lady, try this J-frame Ladysmith. Are there revolvers that you would recommend for the newer user?
Yeah, generally, if somebody, and for instance, there are legitimate reasons, like I said, when we started out talking about the legitimate reasons to pick a revolver. And for that person who says, I really like the attributes of a revolver, I really want one, I'm new to shooting, what do I pick? And my recommendation is generally going to be a steel-framed revolver that fits their hand. And that might be a K-frame, the new Smith & Wesson Model 66. It might be a Ruger GP100. It might be a Ruger SP101. It might even be one of the steel J-frames like the Model 640, one of my favorite J-frames, actually. And so I'll recommend an all-steel revolver because those are going to be the easiest to shoot. The very lightweight revolvers are painful to shoot. They hurt to shoot. I'm no stranger to recoil. I'm used to recoil. I like recoil. I'm the guy who shot an IDPA stage with a Desert Eagle in 50 AE, and then turned around and did it again with a revolver chambered in 445 Super Mag, just to prove that I could do it. And so it's not like I don't like recoil, but I got to tell you, those little lightweight, the 340 PDs and things, those little lightweight guns, even with 38s in them, man, they hurt. I don't like to shoot them. And unfortunately, a lot of people are buying these as their first gun, so I'll tell them, no, don't do that. Leave those alone. Leave the nice lightweight ones. Go get yourself a nice steel gun that's got some weight to it. The recoil isn't going to be punishing. They're going to be easier to use. And later, if you decide that you really want that lightweight gun, great. But in the meantime, you've got a gun that you can really learn shooting technique with. You can really learn revolver technique with, and it's not going to beat you up. So that's what I would recommend.
What about some of the newer polymer steel, aluminum, the Ruger LCR?
Yeah, the Ruger LCR. Yeah, that's the same as the lightweight Smith & Wesson J-frames, realistically. It's a little nicer in terms of recoil because the grip is a little better designed, but they're still punishing to shoot. So in the Ruger line, I'm going to tell them an SP101. If they want something that's in that form factor, the Ruger SP101 is a much, much nicer gun to shoot than the LCR is. And then later, if they want that really lightweight gun, sure, go out and buy an LCR. But start with the SP101.
Sure. Along the same veins with new shooters, speed loaders or moon clips? Which way would you point them?
Speed loaders.
Okay.
If we're talking a defensive gun, speed loaders all the way. And I get into these arguments with people all the time. I've got moonclip guns. I've had moonclip guns forever. And I don't like moonclip guns for self-defense, simply because the damn clips bend. And if they bend, they tie up the gun. And so I'll tell people, listen, the moonclip guns are great for a competition gun. If you're shooting competition, man, there's nothing better than moonclip gun. If you're doing any sort of hunting, anything like that, moonclip guns are great. For self-defense, though, the chances of bending those clips and binding the cylinder up are just too great for me to, in all good conscience, recommend them. And like I said, I've owned a lot of moonclip guns. I got to tell you, I think I've bent the clips in every single moonclip gun that I've owned. The 45s are the best. They've got the thickest clips. They're the hardest to bend. The 9mm ones, I swear you sneeze and they'll bend. So yeah, I'll tell people get a gun with speed loaders. Forget the moon clips. Unless you're going to go shooting IDPA, then if you want to be competitive, you've got to have moon clips.
Right. Sure.
Well, if we go back to the new shooter portion again, I for a while it was all the rage for people to grab these, and there are at least two that are made that I know of. The revolvers that shoot both the 45 long Colt and the 410. I've never thought of those things as anything more than just a novelty gun. But as somebody that knows revolvers, are those legitimate self-defense guns?
I have to be careful here because I'm still not welcome in a certain manufacturer's booth at SHOT Show because of the things I've said in the past, and so I have to be a little careful here. They're novelties, very, very, very simple. Here's the thing: when loaded with 410 shot shells, they are ineffective self-defense weapons. Now that doesn't mean that there won't be some people that will defend themselves effectively with that gun. There are people every day all over this country that defend themselves successfully with 22 caliber pistols and revolvers. I mean, it happens, but it's not the way to bet. Realistically, if you want a revolver with effectiveness that you can count on, let's put it that way.
Sure.
You're going to want to load that gun with 45 Colt. Now you load it with 45 Colt, you've got a gun that's twice as long as it needs to be for the round. It's not particularly accurate with those rounds in it because it wasn't really designed to shoot those things. you might as well have gone out and gotten a gun in 45 Colt to begin with, and you would have had a much better gun than you had with these silly interchangeable things. Is there a place for those things? Frankly, I find it very, very difficult to imagine sort of this scenario where being able to shoot 410 shot shells would be a good thing, except maybe, I suppose, if you lived in water moccasin country and you were, along the banks of the river and you weren't watching what you were doing and a water moccasin jumped out from behind a rock. I don't know if they do that or not, but they jump out from behind a rock and you have to shoot them. We don't have water moccasins in Oregon. Okay, I might be able to concoct that sort of thing where it might be useful, but a 45 Colt loaded with CCI shot shells is going to do the same thing, and it's going to be a better gun than 45 Colt to begin with. So no, I really don't see much of a use for those things. I really don't. I'm nicer about it than I think it was Tom Givens that wrote a long article for SWAT magazine or somebody on those things, and I'm a lot nicer than he was. And yet he's welcome in their booth. I don't know
why. Oh, I did. You mentioned 22.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody who's very recoil sensitive, what do you think of revolvers in something like a 22 Winchester mag?
We're back to that discussion about racking the slide versus pulling the trigger. Because in the vast majority of cases where I've found somebody who's truly recoil sensitive, and there are those people out there, but when I found those cases where people were truly recoil sensitive, they also had that hand strength issue. And I'm thinking back, over the years, in every case that I can think of, anyway, that springs to mind, where the person was very, very recoil sensitive, they've also had the finger strength issue. For those people, one of the auto-loading pistols in 22 or maybe one of the bigger pistols in 32 might be a better choice than the revolver. Now, that being said, there are times when, and I'm thinking twice, I think, in my career, where I've run into situations where we had somebody who had a lot of arthritic issues, who really couldn't pull the trigger very well. They couldn't hang on to the gun well enough to rack it even on the edge of a table. But what they could do is they could cock a Ruger single six. They could do that. And although that is a suboptimal self-defense gun by every measure that we would normally use, in this particular case with this particular woman, actually two women who were elderly, it was the best choice because it was the only one that they could actually use. So, yeah, sometimes the 22 revolver does have a place in the self-defense spectrum. I think it's a very, very specialized, very narrow niche that you just don't run into very often.
I'm just having a hard time perceiving a little old lady wearing a cowboy rig with her single sticks.
Yeah. They usually keep it in a desk drawer, and maybe they wear chaps. I don't know. I don't. I don't ask about their personal life. So, but usually these things are. They're going to be carried. They're going to be in a drawer. In a nightstand drawer or something like that. Like I said, it's a very, very specialized niche. Now, Claude Werner and I disagree a little bit about this. He thinks he's found instances where the little 22 revolvers have been good choices for some of his students, and they may in fact be. I just haven't run into the case where the person was so recoil sensitive that they needed a 22 but could still pull the trigger. I just haven't run into any of those.
We are coming up on the end of the interview here, but before we go, you are, as we said in the intro, in your introduction, you are the author of several books. Where I'm guessing Amazon, the usual place to get books, is where they can find your stuff?
Yeah, Amazon.com, of course. You can get them at the Gun Digest Bookstore.com. They carry the whole line. One of my books is available in Walmart. The Shooter's Guide to Handguns is available in a lot of Walmarts around the country. And some gun stores and some bookstores also carry the titles because they're published by Gun Digest. So anywhere you can find Gun Digest books, you stand a good chance of finding at least one of mine.
Very cool. Well, I do want to certainly thank you for joining us today. It's been really, really informative, and we hope to have you back soon, man.
Hey, it's been a lot of fun, guys. Thanks for having me. It was a great time.
Thanks so much.
And we'll be right back right after this. I let that go. You know, our normal segments are 15 minutes long. That one was 29.
I thought it was running a little more than 15 minutes. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It was so good. I did not want to jump in there and interrupt.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, guys. How many are we going to see? Any of you guys at SHOT Show?
I'll be there.
I'll be there.
Okay. Cool.
Probably not for me.
Oh well. Maybe we can run into each other and have a drink or something together. So.
Oh heck yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, guys, thanks a lot.
Thanks,
We appreciate it.
Thanks again for coming.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.